Welcome to Rock Bottom Redemption. I'm DJ, and this is the podcast, the longer format to the short form videos. We're going to dive a little bit deeper in the topics that we covered this month. Still just real conversation. This month, the 4 weekly topics were connected in a way that may not have been noticeable at first. What people carry without saying anything. What it actually means to move forward after you've caused damage. What I saw myself through the work that I was doing in corrections. And faith, the version that actually showed up for me when everything else was gone. The silence, the story, the mirror, and what was waiting on the other side of it all. And we all know that every setback's a setup. So let's get into it. Let me ask you something before we really get into my story. How long have you been carrying something that you haven't said out loud to anyone? I'm not talking about for just a few days or weeks. I mean years. You know, the thing that's still there when everything else gets quiet. The weight you've gotten so used to that you stop noticing it. Of course, except for in ways that keeps showing up when you're angry, you're distant, or the way you check out when things get close. Most of us were handed the same unwritten rule early on, that showing what's happening inside of us has a cost. In environments that treat toughness as a baseline and everything else as liability, you figure out fast that keeping everything internalized is safer. That moving forward without acknowledging what you're carrying, it somehow gets rewarded. And over time, that becomes habitual and you stop noticing what you're doing. It stops feeling like a choice and it just becomes who you are. Well, here's what that actually does over time though. It doesn't just affect you. The people closest to you, they feel the weight of your silence, even though they can't put their finger on why. That distance that you're creating, they feel that as well. I know this because I lived it. There was a point in my life where I got close to it being the end. Not because I had a plan, not because I wanted it to be over, but because I had internalized every bit of the pain, every bit of the struggle, and I hadn't said a word to anybody. I was functioning, yes. I was checking all the boxes, but nobody around me could tell anything was wrong. You can be in the worst place of your life, and from the outside, it looks like you're somebody who's managing just fine. Or I should say, the weight doesn't go anywhere just because you stopped acknowledging it. It just gets suppressed and pushed deeper, especially without any release or outlet. It compounds, but eventually it's got to find a way out. And that's going to be through anger, through distance, through the body, or through something worse. It's always going to find a way out. The only question is whether you get to have any control over it. Fortunately, one conversation changed that direction for me. One person who wouldn't let me stay in that mindset. All it required from me was saying something. I didn't have to have some grandiose story. It just had to be enough to crack the seal. And once that seal was cracked, the pressure finally had somewhere to go. It started to feel less permanent. And that by itself was a huge difference. If that's where you are right now, say something to somebody who can handle it. You don't need to have it all figured out first. You just need to be willing to break the silence. That's all your first move has to entail. If you know somebody who's been off lately, quieter, more withdrawn, not quite themselves, go to them first. Just make contact before it's too late. Just someone noticing sometimes is enough to remind a person that the blank canvas isn't the finished picture. So what happens after you finally break the silence? After you start to climb back? Well, here's where a lot of people get handed a version of the story that doesn't serve them well. Maybe you've heard it, you hit rock bottom, you find your way back, and now you get a clean slate. A fresh start. The past is behind you and you move forward without it following you at all. I want to be honest with you about that version. Because if you're carrying real damage you caused to people who didn't ask to carry the consequences of it, then that clean slate story might actually be working against you. And here's why. The people you hurt, they don't get a clean slate. Your kids absorb things from seasons that you're not proud of. The people in your relationships were permanently shaped by who you were at your worst. They don't get a fresh start just because you decided you want one. If your redemption story becomes only about feeling free and renewed, especially without any accountability for the cost of other people, then you're building on something that isn't fully honest. That's not an invitation to stay buried in guilt. I've had to work hard not to stay there, but there's a difference between guilt and responsibility. Guilt says I'm bad. Responsibility says I caused harm and I'm going to do something with it. One keeps you stuck, where the other one puts you to work. Moving forward also doesn't mean that you're erasing the past. It means you're figuring out what to do with it. And the person who figures that out, who learns to carry it instead of just running from it, they have something that a clean slate version of someone never will. When you get to sit across from someone in the middle of a hard season and say, I've been somewhere like that, I know the weight of it. that lands differently than advice from someone who walked away clean. People feel that difference. It means something to them. The second I clean up my story too much or put too much distance between me and what actually happened, I lose parts that can help someone else. My history isn't a liability, and neither is yours. The parts that you don't want to talk about are probably the exact words that somebody else needs to hear. So here's a question we're sitting with. When was the last time you looked at something difficult in someone else's life and recognized yourself in it? And then you probably looked away. That's the mirror. Most of us turn away from it more than we realize. When I went into corrections, I thought my job was about managing other people, about keeping order, doing my 8 and then going to the gate to go home. I had a clear role. What I didn't expect was how much of myself I was going to find in the men on the other side of the fence, behind those locked doors. And not in the crimes, not in the circumstances, but in the patterns underneath. There were men who built everything around an identity that eventually fell apart, and they had no idea what to do without it. Men who never learned to ask for help. Men whose anger had become the only outlet that they had left because everything else had been locked away for years. Men holding it together on the outside while something completely different was happening inside. It seemed like every one of those descriptions fit me. Different setting, different consequences, but the same patterns. And that's what corrections did to me. It held up a mirror that I didn't ask for. It showed me the things I thought separated me from the other men, but they were mostly just circumstances, not character, not patterns, not the way we learned to handle what was happening inside of us. Sometimes the question isn't whether you're in a similar situation to the person struggling in front of you. The question is whether their struggle is showing you something about yourself that you've been choosing not to look at. It doesn't have to be corrections work that holds up the mirror. It might be your child, your marriage, a conversation with a friend that hit closer to home than you expected. Anytime you feel that recognition, that uncomfortable sense of, I know what that is, that's worth staying with instead of just turning away from. Don't look away from what the mirror is showing you, especially if it's showing something that you don't want to see, because that's usually the thing that matters most. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt faith in your heart personally? Not just because of your culture, not just because you grew up around it, but in a way that changed something in you. For a lot of people, the honest answer is no. Or maybe it did once and then it got complicated. Maybe there's too much hurt, too many questions without answers. I've been both of those people. For most of my adult life, I had built a framework that wasn't designed to need faith. It was based on hard work and self-sufficiency. I outwork everybody around me. You don't need anybody outside of yourself. But then my career was in turmoil. My identity collapsed, and everything I'd been running from finally caught up to me. The whole structure came down at once. What was left underneath was everything I'd been too busy to deal with. Every question I'd been out working, and I didn't have the tools for any of it. I made sure of that. But here's what that season felt like. I wish I could tell you it was super dramatic, but it wasn't dramatic. It was just quiet. The kind of quiet that shows up when all the noise stops and you realize that you don't know who you are without it. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. The thing you built your life on stops working, and then there's nothing underneath it. It's just emptiness and just free falling. I wasn't looking for faith. I was just at the end of what I had for myself. And in that stillness, after the noise had stopped, something was lurking in the shadows. Something was present in the stillness I hadn't expected or could explain. It didn't need anything from me, and it didn't call me to do something first. And probably just like most of you, I resisted because I didn't understand or believe. My resistance wasn't intellectual. It was about identity, admitting that I needed something outside of myself, and it felt like I was losing the last thing I had. And that last thing was my pride, the belief that I was the one that held it all together. What I had to learn that releasing that belief wasn't a loss. The thing that was protecting was already gone. If you've been standing outside that door, skeptical, burned, or just not sure, you don't have to have it all figured out before you open the door. You get to come as you are. That's the whole thing. The rest gets worked out from there. To wrap things up, this month was really about silence being where the weight builds. How you carry your story determines whether it owns you or whether you can use it. The mirror shows you what you've been unwilling to look at in yourself, and faith is what showed up when you finally ran out of everything else. None of these things are just my story. Probably yours in some form too. That's why they're worth discussing. If something here resonates with you, please pass it along to others who need it. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're at with any of this. I read everything. Every setback's a setup. God doesn't waste the hard seasons.